a promise to keep, and more than $50 million at stake was what was experienced in the last and most controversial capture of Old Lin. What really happened? Stay until the end of the video and find out. On the morning of January 7th, 2003, the front page of the newspapers proudly announced that the UN had concluded its verification of the peace accords. A symbolic cycle was closing. The word peace could keep his graduation certificate in a folder in some New York office. That night, Old Lin, whom the police had already identified as the main leader of Barrio 18 in El Salvador, stopped by Dina, a small popular neighborhood south of San Salvador, to visit the Chinese Picer. The young local palabrero gave him a hug of respect and support. The atmosphere in the area was tense a few days earlier. A Picer man whose name was Mariano Alberto Salazar Garcia had ordered the execution of one of his soldiers, the Kyush, as an exemplary punishment for having lost a weapon, a high price that outraged part of the gang, especially Cranky, the cranky talker from nearby Colonia Ibu. He ruled the area in the gang's ambiguous system of hierarchy and respect. Authority spread to neighboring territories, and the Ibu chief had warned Picer not to kill him. The life of a homeboy isn't worth a gun. But Picer, at 19, felt he had enough character and support to decide what was fair and what wasn't on his own court in a small drug market. On the 8th streets, he controlled for the leadership of the gang, and for Lin, his face visible that night of January 7th at 9:30 a.m. while Ellen and Picer were talking. Cranky and his eternal favorite, Lieutenant Duque, entered the Dina and waited. Minutes after Ellen left, they approached, called Picer aside, and they were murdered on 17th Street, shot. They machine-gunned him with an AK-47 and an M16, weapons of war, to kill a homeboy for having killed another homeboy. And above all, to say something to all the 18-year-olds. The gang can't continue to govern like this. Lin considered it a betrayal. He thought Cranky should have consulted him about such an action. Killing someone he had just hugged was an intolerable breach of trust. Encouraged by Lin, dozens of armed gang members searched for Cranky and Duke in the following days to kill them. They didn't find them, but that night, a fight to the death began to clarify the boundaries of the gang and to make Cranky understand that the 18th neighborhood had only one yardstick and only one judge. In the mid-1970s in Los Angeles, a man from Tez Blanca approached a Salvadoran boy, about 12 years old, who gazed at the window of a restaurant with an accent spat out as if each syllable were a whiplash. Warned him he doesn't speak Spanish here. Spanish is not spoken, he would like to say in the mind of that boy, thin, with an almost fragile appearance. Those words still resonate. He remembers them with an acid smile. When we asked him to explain why he became a gang member, at what age and what place, he tries not to be precise in his answer for the safety of others. He says but reveals that contempt for Latinos, the leaden desire to spit back at whoever. Imagine it led him to seek out the gang. He got his first 18 tattoo, he remembers, being, well, __ in the United States in the distant 70s, he jumped into the clique. The bastards of 18th Street, he stopped, calling himself Carlos and his new brothers. Baptized him with blows Lince Lin and El Salvador more than 3 decades afterwards. No one remembers that X and the Y was changed to a Y. Here it's Lin, and on July 2nd, 2011, he turned 49. The height and impenetrability of a shadow varies, depending on how the light comes and from where you look. A good part of the authority that Old Lin had, or has, in the 18th neighborhood rests on his enigma, on the shadow of his small body, which, by being excessive and intangible, ended up becoming mythical and reigning among men who were often burly and always armed. His diffuse origins, his surprising appearance in late 2002, in a gang leadership that few know how he rose there in the gang. Whoever heard that in the 80s, LN was a civilian who sold drugs to the 18th neighborhood. In the United States, others wonder if he even knows how to speak English, and there are those who doubt if Lin's guerrilla past was in the North It's an essential part of his long shadow is that he belonged to the Revolutionary Party of Central American Workers, PRTC. It's a truth he himself made public years ago, but word of mouth about the gang still stretches and bends it like unwritten laws, making it seem gigantic. They say he was in the guerrilla. They tell you with respect, even the 18-year-olds who hate him, as if on the Farabundo Martí National Liberation Front, FMLN, Lin had learned to be tougher, more fatal. It has nothing to do with ideologies. The same goes for other 18-year-olds who served in the army during the Salvadoran Civil War. Having fought in a war gives them an aura of lost innocence in the gang, which the kids, the young gang members, the kids with guns, won't achieve no matter how much they behead, rape, and tattoo the 3 sixes that add up to 18. Lin's first prison sentence was, it's ironic, that of a revolutionary. He was 18 years old. He says he was captured in February 1981 in an ambush in a canton of Sonsonate, along with Commander Arlen. Beautiful Celia Margarita Alfaro, a friend to whom the PRTC leadership still pays tribute. Unlike him, whom, curiously, everyone in the FMLN has forgotten, or almost everyone. After serving time in the Sonsonate prison and the clandestine prisons of the National Police, he ended up in the La Esperanza prison in Mariona, in Sector 1, then reserved for political prisoners. Lin occupied the cell, and one another PRTC militant who shared a sentence with him in those days remembers him with shoulder-length curly hair, always dressed in a dark, black, or brown hat and an inseparable green cap with a pin on the visor. He was serious and not fond of jokes. Talking with Mojica meant being willing to have a heated argument because he was very serious with clear ideas, says his former friend. Later, there would be a collective transfer to Sector 2 of the prison where Lin met Jose Antonio Morales, son of the Christian Democratic leader Jose Antonio Morales, who was at that time a member of the civil-military junta who governed a country adrift in his prison record, which would grow to obscenity. In the following decades, there is evidence of Carlos Ernesto Mojica Lettuce's imprisonment for subversive acts and his release by direct order of the Supreme Court of Justice on April 1st, 1982. Lin was probably the first gang member for Barrio 18 who leaned against the walls of Mariona prison. After his time in Mariona, Lin returned to the mountains. He fought at the Guapa volcano and was under the orders of the Minister of Security, Manuel Melgar. Regarding what happened next, however, Lin is elusive. His former comrade in arms in prison claims that Mojica deserted the PRTC in 1983. He simply says that he traveled back to Los Angeles, where he was. In the mid-1980s, he and his reunited comrades from Barrio 18 joyfully welcomed the first graffiti of the Mara Salvatrucha on the walls of neighborhoods inhabited mostly by Central Americans. The 18th Street member celebrated the Salvadoran push into the city. However, the deadly enmity that, since 1989, has united the MS-13 and Barrio 18 like two perspectives had not yet emerged. From a mirror, Lin also maintained a closer connection to his homeland than most of the young people who grew up in Southern California in the 70s and 80s, with a Salvadoran surname and nostalgia. But speaking, thinking, and riffing on neighborhoods in English, he didn't take root there and return to El Salvador. His shadow fades away until the light from an archive projects it again against the wall of another prison. The Santa Ana prison. He entered accused of robbery on December 29, 1992, and was released 6 months later after being acquitted. He returned to that same prison on October 12th for homicide. By the way, if you're enjoying the video, we invite you to give us your like and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos. We continue with his latest and most controversial capture after his release from prison in 2002. Old Lin seemed to want to straighten his path, since he was able to stay away from crime for several years, something that many consider impossible, given that with his reputation, it was expected that in less than a year he would be seen behind bars again, either for killing someone again or for selling illegal merchandise, a task that he was doing. But given the contacts he made within the same prison, they helped him learn to move more intelligently and calmly, since he tended to be quite explosive in his younger years. So if someone did something bad to him, it wasn't just about threatening, but more the type who would take whatever was at hand first and then kill the person who had done such a thing to him. But after the time he spent in prison and the things he experienced inside, they taught him to learn to be more cautious and analytical, because being caught quickly didn't mean he liked being in prison. On the contrary, he defined himself as the breeze in the trees and being able to see each afternoon as the sun set and with it a new one. He hated every day they sent him to jail, as all he could see was darkness in every corner. Such was his hatred of the feeling that he swore he would never be in that situation again, no matter what it cost him. This was confirmed years later. Given his fame within the Mara gang, his head had a very high price for the police who wanted to find him so they could weaken La Peligrosa gang, a task that was thought to be impossible, but with internal help. As an outsider and some informants within the gang, they managed to locate Old Lin. What they didn't expect was what happened during the transfer of the man. Fulfilling what he had promised during his trip, the old man began talking to the group of police officers who were guarding him, offering them more than $10 million each. With 5 guarding the car, this amounted to more than $50 million, a figure that would seriously harm his business. However, it was an acceptable price for Lin if, in exchange, he didn't go to jail again. Uncertain about whether to do it or not, the old man, in a final move, told them about an exact address where he had hidden the money. The police, dubious but curious, agreed. Thus, they arrived at the address. What they didn't expect was that, through the maneuvers of the leader of the Mara, he managed to escape from the handcuffs that held him captive. Then, he escaped at full speed, but the furious police opened fire on the road, causing one of the tires to burst and the vehicle to lose control, sending it plummeting down a ravine. At the time, it was thought that Old Lin had died, but as if by a miracle, he was badly injured and had a couple of broken ribs. He managed to survive and head into the deep jungle where, shortly after, he found the house of a farmer who would help him. Thinking he had been the victim of an animal, his wounds later healed. Days later, he asked for a phone number so he could call his men to come for him. And that's how we come to the end of this video. If you liked it, I invite you to give us your like so we can continue making more videos like this one. Also, don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any of our new videos. I wish you a great day. Until next time.